Welcome back to Switch to Linux, and today we will do a brief update on Linux Mint project, and we have a new release where they're really only covering two principles, but one of these gets the Linux Mint Wayland edition probably close to stable. So right now it's experimental. If you like Wayland and you are on Linux Mint, you can select Wayland from the login manager. The default is still X, and frankly, I hope that stays the default forever, but hey, times do change, and Wayland is coming on down the pipeline, and so they have been working towards making it stable. Now, there is one thing that they're going to address before that time, and we're going to talk about that one first. So this is the February update done a couple of days ago. So the first change is inside that system information. As you know, the last update saw an expansion of information in here so you can get specifics on individual components rather than just a giant data dump of your entire computer. A little bit more helpful if you're trying to diagnose small little parts here. But a lot of computers now, as the modern age comes and the difference between computers and smartphones are becoming a little bit unified there, as sensors are being added in. There's gyroscopic sensors and fingerprint sensors and all sorts of other stuff in some modern computers. So Linux Mint is adding that also into the system information to show us various different sensors on the computer. So you will be able to see there in the next update, not yet released, but there will be a tab for sensors. You can see whatever types of sensors are over here. So these could also be sensors that have already been in your system. So fan speeds, temperatures, things like that, battery lifetimes. Those are a number of different sensors that computer manufacturers have put in addition to future sensors that we might see. Like I said, a phone has, depending on what phone model it is, it'll have different types of sensors. Some phones, for example, have a compass. Some of them do not. The Pixel I don't think has a compass, but things like your iPhones generally do. I know my Razer phone has a compass sensor in it as well. Now, that's not specifically what this is targeted to. This is to help you identify things like as I said, processor temperatures and things like that. Stuff that's built into boards, but not always something that in Linux we've typically been able to easily see on the desktop environment level. Now, that brings us to our main feature, and what most of this is discussing is the Screensaver and Wayland. So currently, if you switch to the experimental Wayland, the Screensaver system does not work. And this system is dependent on X. It is a separate application written in Python utilizing C and GTK toolkit. But the problem is over on Wayland, half that stuff just doesn't work. Okay, and so what they've been trying to figure out how to do is to get a unified system that works no matter if you're on X or on Wayland. So what they did is they actually wrapped this into Cinnamon itself, so there's no standalone application any longer, but is in building it in, it's compatible with both Wayland and with X and gives us extra information. So if you are familiar with the Screensaver on Linux Mint, you would have your login screen and you might have your time over there. Well, now we're actually getting extra information. So this picture here shows on it it shows here the media player going. You can also pull up the keyboard, and you can also see some other notifications and things on this Screensaver here as well. So they mention here it's a native look, smooth animation, and it gains full compatibility as Wayland, as they do not want, whether or not we want to default to Wayland in the future is a different topic, but we certainly want to have an option on the table. And some people want to use Wayland, and having the entire system, including the screen dimming in there working, is very important in that push. So He does mention in here, where screensavers, of course, came from. If you grew up in the time of the early days of computers like I did, computer burn-in was a problem, and so you'd have all sorts of screensavers like the famous Windows 95 Maze screensaver. And the entire idea here was just to keep the screen moving different things around so you didn't have burn-in on your screen. They specifically mentions in here that they didn't turn off the screen because back then with the CRT monitors, it would take a while for the screen to come back on, and that would have also been undesirable. Well, in our modern age of screens that turn on and off instantaneously, it makes more sense oftentimes to just shut the screen down. Now, I do miss personally having the cool, fun animations and stuff going on here. I do like that. I really do. And it's kind of sad to me that there's very few options in the modern Linux world of adding these screensavers. If you know some that work on modern Linux, let me know in the comments down there. I might play around with those. I don't know. But he does mention, the whole purpose then was to prevent burn-in, whereas nowadays the purpose of the screensaver isn't as much a screensaver as much as a system lock. You walk away for 5 minutes and you kind of want your system to lock itself out so somebody can't come along and do something nefarious over there. And so the modern idea is a lot different than the old way, which was preserving screens. Now it's, just to keep people out of there if you've stepped away for an extended period of time. And he does mention this as he's going through, talking about the old ways and how things used to work, and now the new way. They're basically creating what is currently in Linux Mint and developing effectively the same thing for Wayland, but with a few extra components. Now, one of the more important things that they're looking at, and this is going to be the huge fix for all of us that I think many of us have been waiting for, is, as you know, sometimes with Linux Mint, if the screen, and this is not just Linux Mint, a lot of Ubuntu-based distros this seems to happen with, particularly if you have your system to set to hibernate or if you close your lid, sometimes it just doesn't like waking back up if you try and unhibernate it, move a key, or open the lid back up. That's actually one of the things that they're addressing. So they kind of talk about some issues with it. So they mention up here, we're dealing with something that happens all the time. Even if we don't understand why it happens, we can even change things and see if it continues. This makes it easy to find the case, and once we find a solution, to make the solution work. When the bug is random, it only happens sometimes. We have no reliable way of finding the cause or testing a solution. This was a random bug in the scenario involved with the window manager, screensaver, Xorg, or the login D. So the 4 different components had to work in this. So it could happen on suspend or hibernation. It could happen as a result of a timeout, which could lock the screen, or a lid close event. We had 6 different overlapping timers and maybe 4 different ways of turning off the screen, starting with the screensaver, locking it, suspending it. It's a huge mess. I didn't try and calculate how many different scenarios there play, but there were more than just a dozen. That is why our systems seem to be unstable with that hibernation or the lid closing. Too many things going. And they're hoping that their new way of doing this is going to resolve it, that there's one application, that being Cinnamon and Cinnamon only, is going to control this. And it's going to be done in a way that's compatible with Wayland, leaving out all these different timers, which should also simplify the code and things like that. So ultimately, I'm actually looking forward to seeing what they actually do as they're looking at how to fix those timeout bugs while improving the Wayland compatibility, while also increasing the features of the particular screensaver itself. So it's like, oh, screensaver, that's kind of boring. When you actually dig into it, it's actually kind of interesting and fascinating, and I kind of look forward to seeing what they're doing over here. Once again, Linux Mint is really focusing on important things, sometimes even if we don't necessarily see it as super important, but this really is one of those last things they need to fix before Wayland moves from experimental into alpha or beta testing for full release. So let me know your thoughts about all that in the comments down below. You can actually find this article over here on the Linux Mint blog, and I know that several of the tech journalists have covered this as well. Thanks for watching, and I hope that you enjoy switching to Linux.